3 months had passed since Admiral Blake received authorization for Protocol Omega, and Earth had become a world transformed by purpose. Every shipyard on the planet and in orbit worked around the clock, the sound of construction echoing across cities that had once known Peace. Senator Gregory Walsh stood before the United Earth Assembly, addressing representatives from every nation with words that would have been unthinkable just a year ago. For the first time in our history, humanity faces an enemy that wants us extinct, he said. The Zalkran hegemony has shown us what happens to species they consider beneath them, and the Galactic Council has shown us that we cannot rely on others for protection. The assembly chamber was packed with delegates who had spent decades arguing over borders and resources and ideologies. Now, they listened in silence as Walsh continued, I am asking this assembly to do something unprecedented. Unite Earth's military forces under a single command structure and dedicate our entire industrial capacity to building the largest fleet humanity has ever known. A delegate from the Pacific Coalition raised her hand. Senator, our intelligence reports suggest the Zalkran hegemony operates 5,000 warships, she said. Even with total mobilization, we cannot match those numbers. Walsh smiled grimly. We do not need to match their numbers, he replied. We need to show them that attacking humanity costs more than they are willing to pay. And for that, we have advantages they cannot imagine in the deep space shipyards above Earth. Commander Lisa Grant watched as the first vessels of what would become known as the Storm fleet took shape. These were not the elegant ships that other species built according to centuries-old designs. These were weapons forged by a species that understood war at a fundamental level. The exterior armor is redundant layered plating, the chief engineer explained as they toured the construction site. Most alien shields are designed to deflect energy weapons, but our ships carry kinetic railguns and nuclear warheads, old Earth technology that the galaxy considers primitive. Grant ran her hand along the hull of the ship designated EDS Vengeance. What about the crew quarters? She asked. The engineer grinned. Standard galactic warships have comfortable quarters and recreation facilities because their crews expect humane conditions during long deployments, he said. Our ships have minimal crew comfort because we are designing for short, brutal campaigns where every cubic meter is dedicated to weapons, armor, or engines. Grant nodded approvingly. Humans had evolved on a world that did not care about comfort. They could endure conditions that would break the spirits of species raised in controlled environments. That endurance was about to become a weapon. Dr. Vincent Hayes stood in a laboratory deep beneath the Rocky Mountains, surrounded by prototypes of weapon systems that made his hands shake when he thought about their potential. The plasma cannon is ready for testing, his assistant said. It generates temperatures comparable to a stellar core and can maintain fire for 90 seconds before the cooling system needs to cycle. Hayes examined the readings with a critical eye. What happens if we push it past 90 seconds? He asked. The assistant looked uncomfortable. The weapon housing begins to fail, and there is a significant risk of catastrophic meltdown. Good, Hayes said, surprising his team. Install manual overrides that allow the weapon operator to ignore safety limits. In a real battle, our crews need the option to trade their ship's survival for maximum damage to the enemy. It was a concept that horrified the assistant because galactic military doctrine emphasized preservation of both ships and crews. But Hayes had studied Earth's military history and knew that sometimes victory required sacrifice that the civilized galaxy could not comprehend in the training facilities scattered across Earth and its colonies. Soldiers prepared for a kind of combat that had not been seen in the galaxy for thousands of years. Colonel Patricia Morris watched as her Marine units practiced boarding actions against mock-ups of Zalkran vessel interiors. Remember, most alien species abandoned hand-to-hand combat centuries ago. She told her troops, They rely on ranged weapons and consider close quarters fighting primitive and barbaric, which means they are not prepared for what we are going to do. The Marines move through the training course with a speed and brutality that would have shocked observers from other species. They use knives and impact weapons alongside their firearms. They train to fight in zero gravity and in pressurized compartments and in the chaos of breached hulls. Morris had spent her career studying the military capabilities of known alien species and had reached a simple conclusion. They had forgotten how to truly fight. They waged war with rules and conventions that treated conflict as a game with predetermined boundaries. Humanity was about to remind the galaxy what war really meant in the Zokron, Hegemony's central intelligence facility. Analysts pored over reports of human activity with growing confusion. All human vessels have withdrawn from Hegemony space. One analyst reported to his superior. Their merchant ships, diplomatic craft, and even their scientific survey teams have returned to Earth or human-controlled systems. The intelligence director was a seasoned officer who had served the Hegemony for 40 years. The humans are retreating, he said with satisfaction. They have finally understood their position in the galactic hierarchy. But a junior analyst raised a tentative objection. Director, we are also detecting unusual activity in Earth's industrial sectors, she said. Power consumption has increased by 300%, and there are signs of massive construction projects in their orbital facilities. The director waved this away. Humans are a developing species, attempting to modernize their infrastructure, he said. This is not a military concern. They lack the resources and expertise to pose a threat to the Hegemony. The junior analyst wanted to press the point, but knew better than to contradict her superior. She made a note in her personal files about the anomalous readings and moved on to other tasks. Hegemony's arrogance would cost them dearly, but they would not realize it until too late back on Earth. Admiral Blake stood before a gathering of the Storm Fleet's senior commanders. The room was filled with men and women who had been pulled from retirement or promoted rapidly because humanity needed every experienced officer it could find. In 2 months, we launched the largest military operation in human history, Blake said. Our objective is not occupation or conquest. Our objective is to make the Zokron Hegemony pay such a terrible price for attacking New Haven that no species will ever again consider humanity an easy target. She activated a holographic display showing the Zokron Empire with multiple systems. Highlighted, we will strike simultaneously at 12 locations. She continued, supply depots, military installations, and fleet staging areas. We will not announce our intentions or issue warnings. We will not follow galactic rules of engagement or limit our weapons to approved types. We will show them what happens when you make an enemy of Earth. Captain Daniel Cruz, one of the youngest officers to receive command of a strike group, raised his hand. Admiral, what about civilian casualties? He asked. The Zokron integrate military and civilian infrastructure in many of their systems. Blake's expression hardened. We will not target civilians deliberately, she said, but we will not sacrifice our objectives to avoid collateral damage. The Zokron showed our children no mercy at New Haven. We will fight this war to win, and if that means the galaxy sees us as monsters, then so be it. The room fell, silent as the weight of those words settled over the assembled commanders. They were about to cross a line that could never be uncrossed. They were about to show the civilized galaxy the face of humanity's fury. Prepare your crews, Blake ordered, and make sure they understand. This is not about revenge. This is about survival. If we do not make the cost of attacking humanity unbearable, we will face extinction within a generation. As the commanders filed out to return to their ships, Blake remained alone in the briefing room. She thought about her daughter and the 50,000 other souls lost at New Haven. She thought about the smug Zokron representative laughing at humanity's weakness before the Galactic Council, and She thought about the storm that was about to break across the stars. The galaxy had ignored humanity's pain and dismissed their demands for justice. Now, they would learn that some wounds do not heal, some debts can only be paid in blood and fire. The chamber of the Galactic Council stood silent as Ambassador Helen Torres walked to the center platform. Her hands shaking but her voice steady when she began to speak. 6 months ago, New Haven Colony was home to 50,000 humans, she said, her eyes scanning the assembled representatives from 100 different worlds. Today, there are 312 survivors, and I am one of them. The council members shifted in their seats, some looking uncomfortable, while others seemed bored by yet another petition from the young human species. Helen continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. The Zokran hegemony attacked without warning and without mercy. Their warships appeared in our system and immediately opened fire on civilian transports trying to evacuate. She pulled up a holographic display that showed the colony world burning, ships exploding in silent flashes of light, and the skeletal remains of what had been humanity's proudest achievement among the stars. They bombed our hospitals first, Helen said, pointing to the ruined buildings. Then they targeted the schools and the residential centers where families lived. When our defense platforms tried to fight back, the Zokran forces destroyed them and then hunted down every escape pod they could find. A murmur ran through the chamber, but Helen was not finished. I watched a Zokran cruiser chase down a medical ship. The ship was clearly marked with rescue symbols and was broadcasting surrender signals. They destroyed it anyway, and then they laughed about it on open channels. The Zokran representative, a tall being with purple scales and cold yellow eyes, rose from his seat. The human exaggerates, he said smoothly. New Haven was positioned in disputed territory and chose to ignore warnings. The hegemony acted within its rights under galactic law. Helen's face went pale with rage, but she kept her composure. Disputed territory, she repeated. Quietly, you call a murder of children a territorial dispute. The Zokran representative waved a dismissive hand. Humans are newcomers to this galaxy and seem unable to grasp the complexities of interstellar relations. Your people built a colony in a strategic location and refused to negotiate. The consequences were regrettable but necessary. The council chairman, an ancient being whose species had mediated conflicts for thousands of years, looked down at Helen with something like pity in his multifaceted eyes. Ambassador Torres, the council sympathizes with your loss, he said. However, the Zokran hegemony maintains a powerful fleet and has been a member of this council for 8 centuries. Without clear evidence of deliberate atrocity, we cannot authorize sanctions or military intervention. Helen felt the crushing weight of those words, but she had expected them. Every species in this chamber had learned to wage war according to rules that had been established over millennia. They fought with precision and limited their targets according to ancient protocols that were meant to preserve civilization even during conflict. They did not understand that humans came from a world that had taught them a different kind of warfare. Then humanity will seek justice on its own, Helen said quietly. The Zokran representative laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Your species operates perhaps 200 warships, many of them outdated by galactic standards, he said. The hegemony commands 5,000 vessels crewed by warriors bred for combat across 10 generations. I suggest you return to Earth and convince your leaders to accept reality. Helen looked at him with an expression that made several council members uncomfortable. Reality, she said. Let me tell you about reality. Humans come from a death world where everything tries to kill us from the moment we are born. We evolved alongside predators that could tear us apart and diseases that could wipe out entire populations. We learned to fight wars that lasted years and cost millions of lives. And we never stopped until we won. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. You have made the mistake of thinking we fight like you do, that we will follow your rules and your protocols. But we do not follow rules when our children are murdered. We do not negotiate when our homes are burned. We do not stop until justice is done. The chamber fell completely silent now. The Galactic Council has chosen not to act. Helen continued, Very well. But know this, when the storm comes, and it will come, remember that you could have prevented it. She turned and walked out of the chamber without waiting to be dismissed, leaving behind a room full of alien beings who had no idea what they had just unleashed. Admiral Catherine Blake stood in the command center of Earth's Defense Fleet headquarters, her gray eyes fixed on the holographic display showing the New Haven system. The ruins of the colony still drifted in orbit around the planet that should have been humanity's gateway to the stars. Ambassador Torres just finished her testimony to the council, her aide said. Quietly, they refused to intervene. Blake had known they would, but hearing the confirmation still made her jaw tighten. She had commanded Earth's defenses for 15 years and had always believed that strength, combined with diplomacy, could protect humanity's interests. Among the stars, New Haven had proved her wrong. How many survivors made it back to Earth? She asked. 312 confirmed. The aide replied, another 47 are still receiving treatment at the orbital medical stations. Blake closed her eyes for a moment, remembering the reports from the few ships that had escaped, families torn apart, children orphaned, brave men and women who had given everything to protect their colony only to be cut down by an enemy that considered mercy a weakness. Her daughter had been among them. Lieutenant Sarah Blake had commanded one of the orbital defense platforms and had bought time for dozens of civilian ships to escape before her position was destroyed. She had been 26 years old. Get me a secure channel to Earth Command, Blake said, her voice hard as steel. Tell them Admiral Blake requests authorization to implement Protocol Omega. The aide's eyes went wide because everyone in the defense fleet knew what Protocol Omega meant. It was the contingency plan that had been developed after humanity's first contact with hostile aliens. The plan that assumed diplomacy would fail and that Earth would need to fight a war unlike anything the civilized galaxy had ever seen. Admiral, are you certain? The aide asked. Protocol Omega means total mobilization and unrestricted warfare. Blake turned to face him, and he saw something in her expression that made him step back. The Zokran killed 50,000 civilians, and the Galactic Council called it a territorial dispute. She said, they think we will accept this because we are young and weak and do not understand how the galaxy works. But they are wrong. She pulled up a star map showing Zokran space with dozens of military installations marked in red. Send the authorization request, she ordered, and begin recalling every human ship and citizen from alien territory. I want complete radio silence about our preparations. Let the galaxy think we are retreating in fear. The aide saluted and hurried to carry out her orders. Blake stood alone in the command center, looking at the tactical displays that showed Earth's relatively small fleet scattered across a dozen systems in 6 months. Those displays would show something very different. The civilized species of the galaxy were about to learn what happened when you attacked a world that had survived ice ages and asteroid impacts, plagues and world wars, a world whose dominant species had clawed its way to the top of the food chain through sheer determination and the willingness to do whatever it took to survive. The Zokran hegemony had awakened something they did not understand. They had awakened the storm. The Zokran military station orbiting the world of Kelroth operated on a routine that had not changed in 50 years. Commander Vexrol sipped his morning stimulant and reviewed reports that showed nothing unusual in the sector his station controlled. One of the hegemony's major supply routes, and served as a staging point for 3 fleet groups, it was considered a prestigious but boring assignment because nothing ever happened in the core systems. That assessment changed in an instant when sensors detected multiple faster-than-light signatures appearing at the edge of the system. "Sir, we have unknown contacts emerging from hyperspace," the sensor officer reported. "Classification and numbers." "Scanning now," the officer replied, his voice rising with alarm. "Sir, I count 87 vessels of unknown design. They are on an intercept." Course for the station. Vexral set down his drink and moved to the command station. The hegemony had not faced a serious military threat in decades, and his first thought was that this must be some kind of drill or sensor malfunction. "Hail them on standard frequencies," he ordered. "This is a hegemony military installation, and they are violating restricted space." The communications officer worked for several seconds before looking up with confusion. "Sir, they are not responding to hails on any frequency." Vexral frowned as the unknown fleet continued its approach. According to galactic law, military forces were required to announce their intentions and allow time for negotiation before engaging these. Vessels were ignoring every protocol, activate defensive shields, and scramble our patrol craft. He ordered, "If they will not identify themselves, we must assume hostile intent." The station's shields came online and 24 Zokran fighters launched from the base. Vexral still expected this to be resolved through dialogue because that was how civilized species conducted themselves. Then, unknown fleet opened fire without warning aboard the Ed's Vengeance. Captain Daniel Cruz watched as his weapons officer confirmed target lock on the Zokran station. "All ships report ready," his tactical officer said. "We have achieved firing position." Cruz thought about the briefing Admiral Blake had given before. They departed Earth. She had been clear about the rules of this engagement. There would be no warnings, no negotiations, no mercy. All ships, Cruz said into the fleet-wide channel. "Weapons free. Fire at will." The human fleet unleashed a barrage that lit up the darkness of Space Orcs. Slugs moving at a fraction of light speed tore through the Zokran. Station shields, like they were made of paper nuclear warheads, detonated against the hull in flowers of destructive fire plasma. Cannons superheated the station's armor until it began to melt. The Zokran had designed their defenses to counter the fighters. Elegant energy weapons used by other galactic species. They were not prepared for the brutal kinetic and thermal weapons that humans had perfected through centuries of warfare on Earth. "Station shields are down," the weapons officer reported. "Enemy fighters are attempting to engage." Cruz watched the tactical display as Zokran patrol craft moved to intercept his fleet. The alien fighters were fast and maneuverable, but they fought according to doctrines that emphasized precision and minimal casualties. Human pilots had trained for something very different. "Launch all fighters," Cruz ordered. Authorization code. No restrictions. The human pilots went after the Zokran craft with a ferocity that shocked the enemy. Instead of the elegant long-range duels preferred by galactic militaries, human fighters close to point-blank range and used their superior maneuverability in ways that the Zokran considered suicidal when a human fighter's weapons failed. The pilot would ram the enemy craft rather than retreat when shields were depleted. They would use their ship's mass as a weapon within 10 minutes. The Zokran fighter screen was destroyed. Commander Vexral stood in the ruins of his command center as alarms blared and systems failed around him. Half his crew was dead, and the station's main reactor was approaching critical failure. "Who are they?" he demanded. "Someone must know who is attacking us." The sensor officer, bleeding from a head wound, managed to bring up a partial scan of the attacking ships. "Sir, I am detecting human biosigns aboard the enemy vessels." Vexral stared in disbelief. "That is impossible." He said, "Humans operate a small fleet of obsolete ships. They could not mount an offensive of this scale." But the evidence was undeniable. The vessels hammering his station were of human design and were using tactics that no civilized species would consider. "Send a distress call to Hegemony Command," Vexrol ordered. "Tell them we are under attack by human forces and require immediate reinforcement." The communications officer shook his head. "Our long-range transmitters are destroyed." "Sir, we cannot send messages beyond this system." Vexrol realized, with growing horror, that this attack had been planned with terrifying precision. The humans had struck at his communications infrastructure first to prevent him from warning the rest of the hegemony. "Prepare to evacuate the station." He said, "We cannot hold against this assault." But even as he gave the order, Vexrol knew it was too late. The human fleet had positioned ships around every escape route. They were not interested in taking prisoners across Socran space. Similar scenes played out at 11 other locations. Supply depots that had operated for decades were reduced to debris in Minute's fleet. Staging areas found their carefully organized formations torn apart by weapons that ignored all accepted rules of engagement. Military installations discovered that their defenses were useless against an enemy that fought with the brutality of a species born from a death world at the hegemony's central command on the capital world. Prime Hegemon Vraltok listened to fragmentary reports with growing disbelief. "How many systems are under attack?" he demanded. 12 confirmed, sir." His intelligence officer replied. "All of them struck simultaneously. Our forces report that the attackers are human." Vraltok's first instinct was to laugh, because the idea of humans mounting a serious military offensive was absurd, but the evidence kept coming. Footage from surviving stations showed human warships fighting with a savagery that belonged to ancient history. Casualty reports indicated losses on a scale the hegemony had not experienced in living memory. "How many ships are we facing?" Vraltok asked. The intelligence officer consulted multiple data streams. "Estimates range from 600 to over 1,000 vessels, sir. They are using hit-and-run tactics and refusing all communication attempts." Vraltok felt a cold sensation spreading through his body. The humans had not retreated in fear as he had assumed. They had been preparing for war. "Mobilize the defense fleets," he ordered. "I want every available ship deployed to protect our core systems." As his officers scrambled to carry out the command, Vraltok accessed the recording of his testimony before the Galactic Council 6 months ago. He watched himself mock the human ambassador and dismiss her species as insignificant. He saw the look in her eyes when she warned him that humanity would seek its own justice. He had thought he was dealing with a weak species that would accept its place in the galactic order. Instead, he had awakened something that the civilized galaxy had forgotten could exist. Admiral Blake received reports from all 12 strike groups as humanity's offensive entered its second day. The results exceeded even her most optimistic projections. Confirmed destruction of 43 Zalchrome military installations. Her tactical officer reported enemy casualties estimated at over 200,000 with minimal losses to our forces. Blake allowed herself a moment of grim satisfaction. The Zalchrone had thought they could murder 50,000 humans without consequence. Now they were learning the price of that mistake. "Transmit orders to all strike groups," she said. "Continue operations according to plan. Refuse all attempts at communication from Zalchrone forces or the Galactic Council. The only message we send is for New Haven." As her officers carried out the command, Blake looked at the strategic display showing Zalcron space. The hegemony's military was in chaos, trying to respond to attacks that came from unexpected directions and use tactics they had never encountered. But this was only the beginning. Humanity had committed its full strength to this war and would not stop until the debt was paid. The galaxy was about to learn what it meant to make an enemy of Earth. 2 weeks into the campaign, and the human fleet had advanced deeper into Zokran territory than anyone had thought possible. But the cost was beginning to show. Lieutenant Commander Aaron Foster stood in the medical bay of the EDS Thunderstrike and watched as doctors worked to save crew members who had been injured in the latest engagement. The Zokran were learning to adapt to human tactics, and their counterattacks were becoming more effective. "How many did we lose today?" he asked the chief medical officer. 17 dead, 34 wounded," she replied without looking up from her work. "That brings our total casualties to over 4,000 since the offensive began." Foster felt the weight of those numbers. 4,000 human lives lost in 2 weeks of fighting. It was a fraction of what the Zokran had lost at New Haven, but it still felt like too much. He made his way to the bridge where Captain Daniel Cruz was reviewing tactical data. "Sir, we are receiving reports from the other strike groups," Foster said. "Overall casualties are approaching 5,000 with another 2,000 wounded." Cruz nodded grimly. He had known this war would not be without cost, but seeing the numbers made it real. "What about our next target?" he asked. Foster pulled up the intelligence file on a Zokran facility designated Station 7. "It is a civilian logistics center with minimal military presence," he said. "Intelligence indicates mostly supply workers and administrative personnel." Cruz studied the data with growing unease. Station 7 coordinated food and medicine distribution to several Zokran colony worlds, destroying. It would disrupt the hegemony's supply lines, but would also cause suffering among civilian populations. "Admiral, Blake's orders are clear," Cruz said. "We hit every target that supports the Zokran military infrastructure." But Foster could not let it go. "Sir, there are families at that station," he said. "Children and non-combatants who had nothing to do with the attack on New Haven." Cruz looked at his young officer and saw the same moral struggle he was fighting himself. "Bring this to Admiral Blake's attention," he said finally. "Request clarification on rules of engagement regarding civilian targets." Aboard the fleet flagship EDS Retribution, Admiral Blake read Cruz's request with a mixture of understanding and frustration. She had known this moment would come, or always forced impossible choices. She called a meeting of her senior commanders via secure channel and was not surprised when the issue divided them sharply. "We cannot afford to show mercy," said Captain Jennifer Cole of the EDS Warhammer. "The Zokran showed none to our people at New Haven. Every day we hesitate gives them time to regroup." But Captain Richard Barnes of the EDS Defender disagreed. "If we target civilians deliberately, we become no better than the enemy," he argued. "Humanity's strength should be that we can be fierce without being monsters." Blake listened to both sides and felt the weight of command pressing down on her. She thought about her daughter Sarah, who had died protecting civilians during the attack on New Haven. Would Sarah want her mother to sacrifice human principles for the sake of revenge? "There is new intelligence you all need to see," Blake said, pulling up classified files. "Our operatives have made contact with a Zokran dissident faction." The holographic display showed documents that detailed the planning of the New Haven attack. The assault on our colony was not a territorial dispute, Blake continued. "It was a deliberate atrocity designed to test the galactic response to human extermination. Prime Hegemon Vroltok planned to gradually destroy all human colonies and claim each was justified by strategic necessity." The commanders read the documents in silence. According to these files, there were Zokran military officers who opposed the attack, Blake said. They were overruled by hardliners who believed humanity needed to be eliminated before we became a threat to the hegemony's dominance. She paused to let that information sink in. "This changes our mission," Blake said. "We are not just avenging New Haven. We are preventing future massacres. But to do that, we need to be smart about how we proceed." Ambassador Helen Torres arrived at the fleet flagship 3 days later after traveling from Earth with Director Claire Bennett. The civilian oversight representative Blake met them in her private conference room. Ambassador, Director, thank you for coming. Blake said, I need your counsel on a matter that goes beyond military tactics. She explained the situation with Station 7 and the broader question of how far humanity should go in pursuit of victory tours. Listened with the haunted expression of someone who had witnessed the worst of what war could do. I survived New Haven because a Zalkron soldier chose not to fire on my escape pod, she said quietly. He was later executed by his own superiors for dereliction of duty. Not every Zalkron supported what happened to us. Director Bennett leaned forward. Admiral, the civilian government authorized this military action because the Galactic Council failed to protect our interests, she said. But we also authorized it with the understanding that humanity would not abandon its principles. If we become indiscriminate killers, we lose the moral authority that makes our cause just. Blake had expected this response and had been wrestling with it herself. Then what do you propose? She asked. The Zalkron will not surrender while they still have the capacity to fight. And every day we delay costs human lives. Torres spoke up. What if we offer them a choice? She said. We have proven we can destroy their military infrastructure. Now, we show them that we can also show mercy, but only if they meet our terms. Blake considered this carefully. You are suggesting we threaten total war while offering an alternative. Exactly. Torres replied. We tell the hegemony that we will accept their surrender, but only under specific conditions. Complete disarmament, war crimes trials for those responsible for New Haven, and reparations to the surviving families. Bennett added her support. If they refuse, then we continue the military campaign with the knowledge that we gave them every chance to avoid further bloodshed. Blake thought about the human casualties mounting daily. She thought about the Zalkron civilians who would suffer if this war continued, and she thought about what kind of galaxy humanity wanted to build. Very well, she said. I will issue new rules of engagement. No deliberate targeting of civilian infrastructure. All Zalkron forces will be given one chance to surrender before we engage. And we will accept defectors who provide intelligence about war crimes. She looked at Torres and Bennett with steel in her eyes. But make no mistake. If the hegemony refuses our terms, we will prosecute this war with every weapon at our disposal until they have no choice but to submit. The new policy was transmitted to all human forces, and Lieutenant Commander Foster felt a weight lift from his shoulders when he read the orders. Captain Cruz called him to the bridge. We have been contacted by Zalkron officers at Station 7. Cruz said. They are requesting to defect and are offering to provide evidence of war crimes in exchange for protection. Foster pulled up the communication. 3 Zalkron military officers appeared on screen, their expressions showing a mixture of fear and determination. We are Captain Zelker and my companions, the lead officer said. We oppose the attack on New Haven and have been gathering evidence of the crimes committed by our leadership. We wish to provide this information to human authorities and request asylum. Cruz made a decision that would have been unthinkable at the start of the war. Station 7 is granted immunity from attack, he said. Prepare to receive our boarding teams for peaceful transfer of custody. As human Marines secured the station and took the defectors into protective custody, Foster realized that something fundamental had shifted. Humanity had shown it could be a terrible enemy. Now it was showing it could also be a just one. The question was whether the Zalkron hegemony would be wise enough to accept the choice they were being offered, or whether this war would continue until one side was completely broken. The capital world of the Zalkron hegemony had not seen enemy ships in orbit for 800 years. Now it was surrounded by the human Storm Fleet. Prime Hegemon Vral Tak stood in his command center and watched the tactical display, with the understanding that his empire was finished in 3 weeks. The humans had destroyed 60% of the hegemony's military infrastructure, and killed over half a million Zalkran warriors. His fleets had tried to adapt to human tactics, but it was like fighting a force of nature every time the Zalkran developed a counter-strategy. The humans would change their approach or simply overwhelm defenders through sheer ferocity. "They are hailing us." Again, his communications officer said, "The human admiral demands our surrender." Vraltuk had ignored 3 previous demands because accepting defeat from a species he had considered inferior was unthinkable, but now he had no choice. "Open the channel," he said. Admiral Catherine Blake appeared on the view screen, her expression hard but not cruel. "Prime Hegemon, your military capacity is broken," she said. "You can continue this war and watch your civilization burn, or you can accept our terms and begin the process of making amends for your crimes." Vraltuk struggled with his pride for a moment before speaking. "What are your terms?" Blake transmitted a document that appeared on his display. "Complete disarmament of all hegemony military forces above system defense levels," she read. "Surrender of all individuals involved in planning or executing the attack on New Haven for trial before a joint human galactic tribunal. Reparations to be paid to the families of victims over the next 50 years. And acceptance of human observers to ensure compliance." Vraltuk read through the terms and realized they were harsh but not vindictive. The humans were not demanding occupation or the destruction of Zalkran civilization. They wanted justice and security. "If I refuse?" he asked. Blake's expression did not change. "Then we will continue our offensive until your species lacks the capacity to threaten anyone ever again," she said. "But understand this. We take no pleasure in this war. We fight because you gave us no choice. Accept our terms, and this ends today." Vraltuk looked at his advisors and saw only defeat in their eyes. "Accept your terms," he said. "The hegemony surrenders." The Galactic Council convened in emergency session as news of the Zalkran surrender spread across known. Space Council Chairman Kethril looked at the assembled representatives with barely concealed concern. "The human military offensive has concluded with complete Zalkran capitulation," he announced. "This represents the first successful war of aggression by a new species in over 3,000 years. The council chamber erupted in debate. Some representatives called for sanctions against humanity for violating galactic norms of warfare. Others pointed out that the Zalkran had committed the initial atrocity and that humanity's response was justified. Ambassador Helen Torres stood before the council once more. But this time, the atmosphere was very different. 6 months ago, I stood here and begged for your help, she said. You told me the Galactic Council could not intervene because the Zalkran hegemony was too powerful. Now you want to punish humanity for doing what you refused to do. Chairman Kethril raised a hand for silence. Ambassador, the Council is not seeking to punish humanity, he said, but we must address the manner in which your species conducted this war. The tactics you employed violated numerous conventions regarding civilized warfare. Torres looked at him with the same intensity she had shown 6 months earlier. You call your rules civilized, she said, but they only work when all parties agree to follow them. The Zalkran broke every rule when they murdered our children, and your precious conventions offered us no protection. She pulled up footage from New Haven showing the devastation. Humanity comes from a world that taught us to survive against impossible odds. Torres continued, we did not ask for this war, but when it came, we fought with every weapon and tactic at our disposal. If that makes us uncivilized in your eyes, then so be it. A representative from one of the older species spoke up. What guarantee do we have that humanity will not use this military power against others in the future? Admiral Blake, who had been granted permission to address the council, stepped forward. The Storm Fleet exists for one purpose: to ensure that what happened at New Haven never happens again, she said. We will maintain our military strength because you have shown us we cannot rely on galactic justice, but we have no interest in conquest or expansion through force. She looked around the chamber. However, we will also accept a permanent seat on this council, Blake continued. If we are to be part of the galactic community, we will have a voice in its decisions, and we will insist that the rules apply equally to all species. After days of debate, the council agreed to humanity's demands. Earth was granted a permanent council seat and the right to maintain military forces for self-defense in return. Humanity agreed to participate in the joint tribunal that would try Zokram war criminals. 3 months later, Captain Daniel Cruz stood on the observation deck of a new space station built at the edge of human territory. Station was called Unity and served as headquarters for a joint task force combining human and alien personnel. It was an experiment in whether the species of the galaxy could learn to work together. Cruz had been assigned as the human liaison officer and spent his days navigating the complicated politics of interspecies cooperation. It was frustrating work, but also hopeful. Captain, we have a delegation arriving from the Kelvin Republic, his assistant said. They want to discuss establishing formal relations with Earth. Cruz smiled. 6 months ago, most species had barely acknowledged humanity's existence. Now, they were eager to establish diplomatic ties with the species that had humbled the mighty Zokran hegemony on Earth. Ambassador Helen Torres visited the New Haven Memorial that had been erected in the capital city. 50,000 names were carved into black stone, including that of Admiral Blake's daughter, Sarah Torres, placed flowers at the base of the memorial and thought about how much had changed. The survivors of New Haven had been given justice, though it came at a terrible cost. She thought about the Zokran soldiers who had defected and provided evidence that helped convict the war's architects. She thought about the human crews who had given their lives in the campaign. She thought about whether the price had been worth it. I hope we made the right choices, she said softly to the names on the wall behind her. Admiral Blake approached and stood in silence for a moment. I have been asking myself the same question, Blake said. We saved humanity from future attacks and earned our place in the galaxy. But I cannot help wondering if there was another way. Torres shook her head. The Galactic Council had centuries to build a system that protected all species, she said. They chose to protect the powerful and ignore the weak. We showed them that strength alone does not guarantee security. Perhaps now they will build something better. Blake looked at the memorial and thought about her daughter. Sarah would have wanted us to show mercy when we could, she said. I think we honored her by offering the Zokran a choice, even if part of me wanted them to refuse so we could finish what we started. The two women stood together in the fading light, representatives of a species that had learned to balance compassion with ferocity. Years later, when historians studied the brief but intense conflict known as the Storm War, they would note several key factors. First, that humanity's Deathworld origin gave them advantages in warfare that civilized species had forgotten existed. Second, that the willingness to employ total war tactics while maintaining moral boundaries was a combination that proved devastatingly effective. And third, that the war fundamentally changed galactic politics by proving that strength had to be backed by justice, or it would eventually fail. The Zokran hegemony never recovered its former power and became a cautious, diminished state focused on rebuilding. The Galactic Council reformed its laws to provide better protection for developing species, and humanity became known as both a valuable ally and a dangerous enemy. A species that preferred peace, but could wage war with a skill that came from 10,000 years of survival on a planet that tried to kill them. Admiral Blake eventually retired and spent her final years teaching at the newly established Galactic Military Academy. When students asked her about the Storm War, she would always end her lectures the same way. Remember that every war has a cost. She would say, "We won because we were willing to pay that cost." But victory does not erase the scars it leaves behind. The true measure of a civilization is not how well it fights, but what it chooses to fight for. Captain Cruz continued to serve in the Joint Task Force and helped establish protocols that allowed human and alien forces to work together effectively. Lieutenant Commander Aaron Foster wrote a book about the ethical challenges of the war that became required reading for military officers across multiple species, and Ambassador Helen Torres became Earth's first representative to serve as Galactic Council mediator, using her experience to help other species resolve conflicts before they escalated to war. The storm had passed, but its lessons remained. Humanity had earned its place among the stars through blood and sacrifice. Now they worked to build a galaxy where such sacrifices would not be necessary. Again, the memorial on Earth stood as a reminder of what had been lost, what had been gained. 50,000 names carved in stone, testament to the price of justice.